You gave your best, your heart, your patience, and still they chose to betray it. But there comes a moment, silent, undeniable, when the very person who wounded you is forced to face what they've done. Not because you demanded it, but because truth always finds a way. This message isn't about revenge, it's about clarity. It's about strength, and it's about the quiet power of healing without seeking validation. Because when you rise unshaken and whole, they break not from your pain, but from the weight of their own reflection. That's the moment everything changes. They always looked so sure of themselves, didn't they? The way they spoke, the way they moved, like the world belonged to them. Like your emotions were just obstacles in their path. That smug confidence, it wasn't strength, it was a performance. A show, and for a long time, you may have believed it. We all do at some point, because narcissists are masters at the illusion of power, control, superiority. But power that's not rooted in truth never lasts, it cracks, and when it does, it's not loud. It's not dramatic, it's subtle, it's silent. It begins in the smallest of ways. They start to lose grip. Not because someone confronted them, not because justice showed up with a spotlight, but because life has a way of holding up a mirror, and even they can't run from that forever. The illusion begins to crumble the moment they realize their words don't work on you anymore. That same charm, that manipulation, those games they bounce off. You don't react, you don't chase, you don't explain, and suddenly, they're not in control. That moment is terrifying for them. Because control is everything, it's their identity, their fuel, their sense of self-worth doesn't come from within, it comes from how much they can make others bend, break, and beg. And when you stop doing that, when you pull back your power, even just a little, it sends a message louder than any confrontation ever could. They may not show it at first. Narcissists are good at pretending they're unbothered, but deep down, panic sets in. Because for the first time, the script isn't working, the stage they built is collapsing, and the audience, you, has walked out. The illusion of power starts to dissolve not in your tears, but in your silence, in your healing. In the fact that you no longer seek their approval, that you're no longer playing the role they cast you in. Here's the thing about illusions, they require constant reinforcement. The narcissist has to keep performing, keep spinning, keep lying, both to others and to themselves. But when the people around them stop playing along, when you stop feeding that illusion, the effort becomes exhausting. They start slipping, they lash out more, or they retreat, they become inconsistent. You'll see it in the way their stories start to unravel. You'll feel it in how their presence begins to shrink in your life, not grow. They're losing the grip, not just on you, but on their own narrative. And it hits them in a quiet moment, not when the world is watching, but when they're alone. When no one's there to validate the version of themselves they've been selling, that's when the breakdown begins. Slowly, silently, that confidence they wore like armor, it begins to feel like weight, heavy, cold, empty, because when you've built your power on lies, there's nothing to hold you up when truth shows up. And truth always shows up. You may never see their breakdown, you may never hear the apology. That's not what this is about. Because the moment they break down isn't about you witnessing it, it's about you understanding that it does happen. That the universe, life, truth, whatever you call it, has a way of balancing the scales, not with revenge, but with clarity. And maybe you've asked yourself, do they even feel anything? That question has probably haunted you more times than you can count. The answer, yes, but not always in the way you hope. They feel the loss of control, the absence of admiration. The silence where there used to be praise. They feel it when their new targets don't stay long, when their lies don't stick. When their charm no longer disarms, they feel the void, but by the time they do, you're gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, you're out, and that's what breaks them, not because they loved you the way you loved them, but because they need someone to reflect back the image they want to believe about themselves. And when you stop doing that, when you choose peace over pain, freedom over fear, you strip away their illusion. And for someone who's spent their entire life hiding behind it, that exposure is unbearable. That's when the breakdown begins. And here's the truth you need to hold on to. You never needed to destroy them to win. You just needed to stop feeding what was destroying you. Healing is your justice, your peace is your power, and when you walk away whole, you've already won. You never needed their breakdown to validate your pain. Your healing already did that. You might have spent a long time thinking the only way to be heard was to speak louder, to fight harder, to explain more. You wanted them to understand, to really see what they did to you. So you argued, you cried, you begged, you tried to hold a mirror up to them with your words, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd finally recognize the damage. But it never worked, did it? Because narcissists don't listen to understand, they listen to control, and the more you tried to make them understand, the more they twisted your pain into ammunition. That's why silence becomes so powerful, not the kind of silence that's passive or weak, but the kind that's intentional. Controlled, grounded, the kind of silence that says, I've said everything I needed to say, I don't owe you another word. That's the silence that shakes them, because now they have nothing to push against, no argument to win, no reaction to provoke, and for a narcissist, that's terrifying. See, your voice used to feed their ego, even when you were upset. Your tears, your frustration, your need for clarity, it kept them relevant. It meant you were still emotionally invested. And as long as they could get a reaction out of you, they felt powerful, they felt seen. But the moment you go quiet, not out of fear, but out of strength, it sends a message that they can't ignore. You no longer need them to see your worth. That silence, that decision to disengage, it flips the power dynamic completely. Suddenly, they're not in control anymore. They can't script your response, they can't spin the narrative. And most importantly, they're left alone with something they've spent their entire life running from, their own thoughts. Let that sink in for a moment, because when you stop talking, their inner world gets loud, the games don't work. The charm doesn't land, they're left with the echoes of everything they've done, and no one there to silence it for them. That's when cracks begin to form, not because you shouted them into awareness, but because your calm, unbothered presence made them face a truth they couldn't avoid. You don't need their validation anymore, and here's what they don't expect. They don't expect you to grow without them. They don't expect you to get better, stronger, more peaceful in their absence. They expect you to fall apart. They expect you to keep checking their page, to keep responding to messages, to show up to the drama. But when you don't, when you go quiet and focus on your healing, you rob them of the chaos they fed on. And now they're the one spiraling. That silence becomes a mirror, and they can't manipulate silence, they can't spin it. It's not like a conversation they can dominate or gaslight. It's still, it's grounded, and most of all, it's yours. You own it, and in that stillness, something starts to shift in them, not because they've suddenly grown a conscience, but because they've lost control over the narrative. And that control, that's everything to them. You may not see it, you may not hear it. But in those quiet moments, when you stop responding, when you stop explaining, when you stop showing up for the performance, they start to break down. Because now, they have to sit with what they did, they have to sit with the fact that their games don't work on you anymore. And they feel the void your silence created. Not every battle is meant to be fought with words. Some of the strongest statements you'll ever make are spoken through your absence. Through your peace, through your decision to walk away without the need to be right. Because in that silence, you're not just protecting your peace, you're reclaiming your power. You're no longer trying to fix what they broke. You're choosing to heal instead, and that's the moment the narcissist truly begins to unravel. Not when you called them out, not when you tried to make them understand, but when you stopped trying altogether. Because silence is the one thing they can't argue with. It doesn't play into their ego, it doesn't bend to their narrative. It just is, and in that space, they're forced to face something real, something they can't spin or run from, the truth of who they are and what they did. So no, you don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to prove your pain to someone who refuses to see it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. That's when the real shift happens. That's when they start to break. There's a moment, and it doesn't come with fireworks or some dramatic explosion, where the narcissist finally sees it. Not all at once, but in pieces, in fragments. It usually happens when they're alone, when there's no audience to perform for, no one left to charm, manipulate, or impress. And in that quiet, something starts to feel different. It's not guilt, at least not in the way you might hope. It's discomfort, exposure, like standing in front of a mirror with nowhere to hide, and for the first time, the reflection stares back unfiltered. This moment doesn't arrive because you begged for it. It doesn't show up in the middle of an argument or during a confrontation. It's quieter than that. It creeps in when the distractions fade, when their newest source of validation doesn't stick, when their latest manipulation doesn't land, when people stop responding the way they used to. Suddenly, they're left with themselves, and that's a dangerous place for someone who's spent their whole life trying to avoid exactly that. They start to feel it not through empathy, but through emptiness. See, narcissists build an identity on reaction. If no one's reacting, they're nobody. If no one's clapping, admiring, or fearing them, they start to question their worth. And that question is one they can't answer, so they look inward, not because they want to heal, but because there's nothing else left to look at. And in that stillness, the mask slips. They see the damage, not always in a way that leads to repentance, but in a way that reveals the consequences. They start to realize what they did to you, not because they've suddenly developed empathy, but because they can no longer escape the reality of what their actions cost them. You're gone not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. You're no longer orbiting around their world, feeding their need for control. You've become your own sun, your own center, and they feel that absence like a weight. That's the mirror moment. The realization that everything they once held, your trust, your presence, your love, is no longer available to them. Not because someone took it away, but because they broke it. They did that. They shattered something they didn't think was fragile, because they assumed you'd always come back. That you'd always need to explain, that you'd always fight for clarity, but you didn't, you healed instead. And now they're left holding the consequences. That's what starts to break them. They begin to rewind the past in their mind. Conversations where you tried to explain, moments you pleaded to be heard, the times you sat in silence, hoping they'd just ask, "Are you okay?" And they didn't. They were too busy winning, too focused on control. But now those moments play like echoes in their head, scenes of a movie they never paid attention to until it was too late. And it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel powerful, it feels hollow, because for the first time, they're not looking at you as a mirror to boost themselves. They're seeing you as a human being, and that shift is devastating to someone who's never truly connected with others beyond what they could get from them. They don't know how to hold that kind of truth, so it hits them hard in waves. Maybe they scroll through old messages and realize how little they actually listened. Maybe they see your face in a photo and remember how tired your eyes looked and how they ignored it. Maybe they hear your voice in their head, saying the things they dismissed, and now those words won't go away. They linger, they haunt. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about hoping they suffer. It's about understanding what happens when truth can no longer be avoided. It's not always instant, and it's not always visible from the outside, but it happens. That mirror moment arrives. And when it does, they're forced to sit with the reality that they did this to someone who trusted them, to someone who cared, to someone who only ever wanted to be seen and heard, and instead was used, dismissed, and broken. And they realize they weren't powerful, they were scared, they weren't superior, they were running, and now the thing they were running from is standing right in front of them, not you but themselves. Who they are when the performance ends, that's the real breakdown, because when someone who's built their entire life on avoiding the truth is finally forced to face it, it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like collapse, and no matter how much they try to rebuild the illusion, once they've seen themselves clearly, nothing feels the same. They never expected to lose you, that's the truth. Somewhere in their mind, they always thought you'd be there. Not necessarily beside them, but circling around them, accessible, reachable, open to the same cycle of apologies that weren't sincere and promises that were never meant to be kept. They assumed you'd always need them more than they ever needed you, because in their world, you were the one trying, reaching, fixing. But what they didn't see coming was the moment you stopped, and when that happened, when you really let go, not just in words, but in energy, something shifted. Not immediately. At first, they probably didn't notice. Maybe they even felt relief, assuming they'd won again, that they'd drained you just enough to leave you quiet and defeated. But what they didn't realize was that your silence wasn't surrender, it was growth, it was distance, it was you rebuilding yourself in the absence of their chaos. And then one day it hits them, that pang of recognition, that sinking feeling that what they used to reach for your attention, your love, your presence is no longer there. They go to send a message and pause, because they know it won't land the same way. They scroll through old conversations and realize how long it's been since you responded like you used to. The warmth, the hope, the belief in them, it's gone, and that absence starts to echo louder than any argument ever could. This is the moment they realize what they lost, but by now, it's too late. They don't miss you in the way you missed them. You miss them in hope that things could be better, that they could grow, that love could be mutual and honest. They miss you in regret, not always because of what they did, but because of what they no longer have access to. You were the anchor, the one who saw beyond the mask, the one who stayed when it was hard, the one who gave them the kind of love they didn't even know how to hold, and now that love is gone. Pulled back not out of anger, but out of survival, and that cuts deeper than they expected, because for all the games they played, they believed you'd never truly leave. They thought they had more time, more control, but when a person heals, that healing doesn't announce itself, it just happens. Quietly, consistently, until one day, they look up and realize they don't know how to reach you anymore. Not emotionally, not spiritually, you've grown into someone they can't manipulate, someone they can't fool, someone who no longer fits inside the box they kept trying to put you in. That's when regret sets in. They remember the moments you stood by them, the times you fought for the connection, the words you said that they brushed off, the tears you cried that they labeled too sensitive. They remember ignoring your needs, laughing off your pain, minimizing your boundaries, and now, in the silence, those memories return. Not because they want to make it right, but because they realize they can't, and you've changed. The love you used to give so freely, you now give to yourself. The validation you once begged for, you now draw from within. You're not the same person who tolerated confusion in the name of love. You've become clear, rooted, and they can feel that from a distance. They might try to come back, they might reach out in small ways, a text, a memory, a casual "how are you?" But it's not the same, because you're not the same. You don't flinch when they speak, you don't bend when they push. You respond, if you choose to, from peace not pain, and they know that the version of you who once needed their approval has evolved into someone who doesn't need their presence at all. That's the loss, that's what they sit with, that's what breaks them, because what they thought was control was really borrowed time. What they thought was dependence was really your deep loyalty, your deep love, something they never truly valued until it was out of reach. And now, they're stuck with the version of themselves that doesn't have access to you anymore, not your heart. Not your attention, not even your anger, just distance, final, silent, real, and they realize they didn't just lose a person. They lost the one person who saw the good in them, even when they didn't show it, the one who believed they could do better. The one who would have stayed if only they had made the choice to change, but they didn't, and now, all that's left is what they broke. Control, that's the word we have to talk about, because for a narcissist, control isn't just a tactic, it's their lifeline. It's the very thing they rely on to feel safe, important, superior. They control how people see them. They control how conversations flow. They control your emotions by constantly pulling you back and pushing you away. It's not about connection for them, it's about command. They want to be the center, the decision maker, the one who always has the last word. And as long as they're in control, they feel like they're winning. But the thing about control is, it's fragile, it doesn't last forever, especially when the person they're trying to control, you, begins to wake up. When you begin to see what's happening, when you stop reacting the way you used to, when your healing starts to interfere with their ability to push your buttons. That's when the walls start to shake. They don't break down because they feel bad for what they've done. They break down because they realize their grip on you is slipping, and that's their worst fear, losing control of the narrative. Losing control of your mind, losing control of your emotions, because when they can no longer control how you feel, they can no longer control how you see them. And that's where the breakdown begins. They start to panic, but not always in ways you can see. Sometimes it looks like silence, sometimes it looks like reaching out with empty words, trying to test the waters. Hey, just thinking about you, or a hope you're doing well. It's subtle because they don't want to admit they're losing their place in your world, but make no mistake, it's not love that motivates that message. It's fear that the version of you they once had access to, the one who waited, who explained, who forgave too soon, doesn't exist anymore. And they're right, that version of you is gone. You're stronger now, not because someone gave you a new life, but because you rebuilt it piece by piece, quietly, while they weren't looking. They thought silence meant you'd given up, but what they didn't see was that your silence was the space where you healed. It's where you remembered who you were before they tried to define you, and here's where it really hits them. When they see that their control no longer holds weight, you no longer explain yourself in circles, you don't feel the need to fix what they broke. You're not waiting for closure or clarity, you've already found it within yourself, and suddenly they're staring at someone they can't predict, can't manipulate, can't mold. And that terrifies them, because now they're powerless, not because you fought them harder, but because you stopped playing the game. Control was never about love, it was about power, and once that power is gone, they have to face themselves without the safety net of your attention. And that's when the unraveling starts, slowly, quietly, when they realize you're no longer a character in their story, but the author of your own. They don't get to edit your emotions anymore. They don't get to rearrange your memories or rewrite your reality. You've taken that pen back, and they feel it. You'll know it's happening. You'll feel the shift. They might start mimicking your words, trying to mirror the growth they see in you, not because they've changed, but because they think that's the only way to pull you back in. But you'll know the difference this time. You'll hear the empty tone. You'll recognize the recycled lines, because when someone's only sorry about losing control, not about the hurt they caused, it rings hollow. They never expected you to heal without them. They never thought the person they once broke would become the person they could no longer reach. But that's the thing about real healing, it puts you out of reach to anyone who hasn't done the same work. It makes you immune to the same traps, it makes you clear, steady, whole, and to a narcissist, that's the end of the game. Because once you're whole, they can't break you to feel powerful. They can't use your insecurities to keep you close. They can't twist your love into something they own. You've stepped out of their reach, and that's where their world starts to collapse. Not because you wanted revenge, not because you planned their fall, but because you chose yourself. You walked away not to punish them, but to protect your peace. And without your pain to feed on, they starve, not for attention, but for control, and that is when everything begins to fall apart for them. Healing doesn't always come with a loud announcement. Sometimes it shows up in the quietest moments, in the way you stop explaining yourself, in the way you start breathing easier, in how you finally sleep through the night without replaying conversations in your head. And while they may not understand it, while they may not even acknowledge it, your healing is doing something powerful. It's humbling them, not because you said the perfect thing, not because you convinced them to feel remorse, but because you rose, quietly, calmly, fully. You didn't try to win, you didn't compete for their understanding. You just got better, you started showing up for yourself in ways you once hoped they'd show up for you. And that's where everything starts to shift. They don't expect you to heal, not really, they expect you to cope, maybe. To move on in a half-broken state, but not to fully rise, not to rebuild, not to glow from the inside out. That kind of peace, that kind of clarity, it was never part of their plan for you, because when you were broken, they felt strong. When you were confused, they felt in control. When you were hurting, they felt needed. So when you stop showing those signs, they lose something they were feeding on. They don't say it out loud, most won't, but deep inside, it shakes them, because healing exposes something they've worked hard to avoid, their own lack of it. Your growth becomes a mirror they can't look away from. Every step you take forward highlights how stuck they are. Every boundary you set reminds them of the ones they never respected. Every ounce of peace you find makes the chaos they carry even more obvious. They may try to act like they're unbothered. They might even pretend they're doing better than ever, but the truth is they notice. They feel it, Because narcissists aren't just obsessed with control, they're obsessed with image. And when your healing begins to shift the story, when you're no longer the one falling apart, they start to lose their grip on how they're seen. Suddenly, they're no longer the one who had it all together. They're the one who did damage and walked away from it. And that realization humbles them, not in a way that softens them, but in a way that rattles the foundation they've built. Because what does it say about them when the person they hurt didn't just survive, they thrived? They didn't believe you could stand tall again. They counted on your silence to mean weakness. They assumed your distance was bitterness. But what they didn't realize was that you were just getting started, that you were healing from the inside out, that you were becoming someone who no longer needed closure from them, because you found it in yourself. And that's a different kind of power, one they don't know how to match, because control is external. It's about manipulating situations, people, outcomes. But healing, that's internal, it's steady, it doesn't waver based on what someone else does or doesn't do. You walk differently when you're healed, you speak differently, you don't flinch at the things that used to trigger you. You don't explain your boundaries, you just live by them. And to someone who used to thrive on your emotional chaos, that kind of stillness is intimidating. They'll feel the shift, not just because you're gone, but because you're free. Your joy isn't about proving anything. It's not loud, it's not performative, it's not a message to them, but it reaches them anyway. Every moment you choose peace over conflict, clarity over confusion, wholeness over drama, they see it. They sense it, and they know they were never the source of your strength, they were the lesson. Painful, yes, but a lesson that pushed you into the deepest transformation of your life, and that's what humbles them. Not that you fought back, but that you stopped needing to, not that you tried harder, but that you let go. Not that you screamed for justice, but that you built your own, you walked away with grace. You didn't match their chaos, you didn't need to destroy them, you simply chose not to let them destroy you. And the irony is, that's the very thing that dismantles them, because when someone's identity is rooted in being needed, in being chased, in being forgiven on demand, nothing threatens them more than someone who walks away without looking back. Your healing becomes the proof they can't erase, the story they can't rewrite, the ending they didn't control. You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them, and nothing humbles a narcissist more than knowing they had you. And lost you not to someone else, but to your own healing, and they'll carry that truth far longer than they ever carried your love. If you've ever questioned your worth after being broken by someone who never took responsibility, this video is for you. Watch till the end. Your healing is not just possible, it's powerful. Bell subscribe for more soul deep truths that help you rise, not just recover. ****